some of the investigation from the very beginning goes in the right direction. But the criminal may turn out to be cautious and lucky. As a result, it may take decades to achieve justice. The heroes of today's story lived in the city of Antioch, California, USA. It is a quiet, small city with a population of about 100,000 people, whose calm was disturbed by a silent horror. June 22nd, 1980 was a Sunday. Early in the morning, 25-year-old Stephanie Malene returned home. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. Everyone in the house was asleep. The young woman had been on a shift at the restaurant where she worked as a waitress. Then, before returning home, she visited a colleague, so she was very tired. She walked through the first floor of the house, but did not see her cousin Susan Bombardier, who at that time was 14 years old. Although earlier she always waited on the couch in the living room and greeted her cousin. Stephanie did not think that the girl should be somewhere on the first floor. She called her by name several times, but no one answered. All this was unusual, but it did not alarm the woman. It was too early and dark to search for Susan in the rest of the house. Stephanie did not want to wake her daughters, who were still asleep in their nursery. The day before, on June 21st, she had left Susan to look after her two daughters, who at that time were 5 and 6 years old. Susan always liked to spend time with children. The high school student willingly agreed to look after them and help her cousin. She loved her nieces very much. Like any responsible teenager, she was delighted with such an important task. Susan was described as a sweet and hard-working girl. She had excellent grades at school and big plans for the future. Stephanie decided that her cousin had fallen asleep in the girl's room, did not want to disturb anyone, and simply went to bed. A few hours later, Stephanie woke up and began to prepare breakfast for the children. After some time, a call came to the home phone. Susan's mother was asking when her daughter would return home. Stephanie wanted to ask her cousin personally, went to look for her, but did not find her in the children's room. Her daughter said that Susan had not been in their room when they woke up, and they also did not know where the girl could have gone. Stephanie began to inspect the whole house. First the first, then the second floor, but she did not find her younger cousin anywhere. Stephanie realized that Susan had not even spent the night in the house. This sounded very alarming. Stephanie told her mother about it. Both could not understand what had happened. Susan had never been a problematic teenager, had never run away from home, had no boyfriend to go to. All the more, she would not have left little children alone in the house. The older cousin began carefully inspecting her home for clues. She tried to figure out what could have happened that night. Stephanie could not find any signs of where Susan had gone. Together with her mother, she decided to contact law enforcement. Police officers arrived at the scene and immediately began collecting information to find out when the missing girl was last seen. According to Stephanie, on the evening of June 21st, she was going to a restaurant shift and asked her cousin to look after the children. It was also assumed that after work, Stephanie would briefly stop by a colleague's birthday party to congratulate her. In fact, she worked not far from her home, but did not want to leave her 5 and 6-year-old daughters without supervision. According to Stephanie, on June 21st at about 8 p.m. she called home and asked her cousin to bring her clean clothes to work. Susan agreed and fulfilled the request. That was the last time she saw the missing girl with her own eyes. Everything was fine with Susan. Seeing her cousin off, Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved at her. Both of Stephanie's daughters, as well as colleagues who worked with her that same evening, confirmed these words. The girls also said that Susan returned home. Almost immediately she began preparing them for bed. She fed the children dinner. Then they picked up toys. Both described the clothes their aunt was wearing. It was a nightgown and a red robe. Obviously, she was not planning to go anywhere dressed like that. After putting the children to bed, the girl was going to watch TV or read. This was her favorite pastime. It was assumed that she would stay overnight at her cousin's house, and in the morning, after everyone woke up and had breakfast, she would go home. At 1:30 a.m., Stephanie was already at the party. To make sure everything was okay, she called home once again. According to her, Susan quickly answered the call, said that everything was fine and the children were asleep. The girl also said she was going to bed because she was tired after a long day. These eyewitness accounts made it possible to reconstruct an approximate chronology of events. The girl's disappearance occurred within 3 hours, between about 1:30 a.m., when the last call home was made, and 4 a.m., when Stephanie returned home and did not see Susan. Any assumptions by the police that the girl could have run away were rejected by her mother and cousin. Susan was very calm, compliant, not prone to outbursts of aggression. She had no conflicts with relatives that caused her to run away. Her teenage years were going calmly. Moreover, the bag in which she carried all her things, her clothes, and even her shears were going calmly. Moreover, the bag in which she carried all her things, her clothes, and even her shoes were a bit plain. She clearly would not have run away. It was assumed that the girl might have been down. Hundreds of doctors had broken into the house. Burglars had burglars had burglars had there's life in the swamp. Chance wolf sells with his comes reserved of someone who is the very least she calmly let him inside. She calmly let his privilege and said me like this. Strains of struggles, as there were no signs. The children sleeping in next rooms did not hear any noise. Detectives detected all ears, began to new noise. The trigger table later, but love's long feet. The joy of a candle, the children sleep. Detectives went on title. Detectives activated. Just proof interested either me. Okay. On the side.
Everyone was worried about him. And regarded neighbors and girls studied. Everyone was worried, but no one could give any clues. No one noticed any suspicious strangers or cars in the neighborhood that night.
That Sunday evening was no different from other days. Considering the time when the disappearance occurred, there could be no question of surveillance cameras. As a result, the investigation reached a dead end, so detectives turned to the public for help. Investigators tried to get at least some valuable information from random witnesses, but even this did not work. A few statements came into the station, but these leads turned out to be difficult. Within 5 days from the disappearance, detectives had not advanced. On the 6th day, law enforcement officers organized a large-scale search. Dozens of police officers and volunteers combed the area around the Malin house, nearby forests, fields, and the riverbank. They also checked abandoned buildings and warehouses. However, this brought no results. In the following weeks, detectives continued to receive information from residents. Every tip was carefully checked, but each time it led to nothing. There was no trace of Susan. The family was in despair. Her mother and cousin made public appeals to anyone who could help. Local newspapers and TV stations actively covered the disappearance. Flyers with the girl's photo were distributed everywhere. Despite the massive effort, silence remained. Susan seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Over time, the case went cold. For years, police could not find any clue. Witnesses gradually forgot details, and the investigation had no development. The family lived in constant anguish, not knowing what had happened to their daughter. Only many years later, thanks to new technologies, a ray of hope appeared. In the early 2000s, DNA analysis became available to investigators. The preserved biological material from the crime scene was re-examined. The results shocked detectives. The DNA belonged to a man who had already been serving time for another crime. The investigators now had a concrete lead. Step by step, they began to reconstruct the tragic night when Susan disappeared. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The girl had been deceived by someone she trusted. He entered the house unnoticed, took her away, and committed a terrible crime. After so many years of silence, the truth finally began to surface. No new information about the missing girl was received. Considering the time, they began to think that Susan might have died. Naturally, her relatives did not want to believe it and continued to hope they would see the girl alive. The family all this time actively spread information about her disappearance, put up and handed out leaflets on the street. After analyzing the closest circle of the family, they could not find people who could pose a threat to the schoolgirl. There were also no troubled teenagers in her company. They began to analyze criminals inclined to sexual violence or already caught in violent crimes in the county. There were several such, but all had confirmed alibis. The situation changed only on June 27th. On that day, About 100 kilometers from the townhouse where Stephanie lived with the girls, a man was fishing on the San Joaquin River. He noticed something suspicious in the water. A rather large object was drifting in the river. Coming closer in the boat, he saw the body of a girl without clothes. It was carried to the shore not far from the bridge. The witness immediately contacted the police. The deceased was taken out and sent for forensic examination. She had been in the water for several days. Because of this, the body began to decompose, but not strongly enough yet to hide all traces of the crime. According to the forensic expert, the girl had been raped, and the cause of death was a stab wound to the chest. The killer pierced her heart, so the victim quickly died. She had no documents or things with her by which the deceased could be identified. They began checking disappearance reports in the county. Among them was the report from the Bombardier family. Because of the warm season and the effect of the water, the body began to swell, so the final identification was made using dental records. As a result, the forensic expert confirmed that the victim was the missing Susan. The criminal's materials were collected. Even attempts were made to study them. However, the technologies of the 80s did not allow almost anything to be done. At that period, there was not even a database that could be used for comparison of information. As a result, all law enforcement could do was send the collected data into the archive and continue the search. Now the case of Susan's disappearance was officially reclassified into a murder investigation. There were several suspects. A man inclined to violence, who lived in the same area as Stephanie's house, was recorded. The second suspect was the ex-boyfriend of the victim's sister, with whom she had dated for some time. The young woman said that he behaved strangely, so she decided to break up with him after a few meetings. Just a day before Susan's disappearance, he came to her townhouse and asked for a second chance. However, Stephanie refused, and the ex-boyfriend left. There were simply no other suspicious men in the family's circle. Only these the murdered girl could know and open the door to the house. Detectives carefully checked both, but no undeniable evidence was found. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, nothing that would connect the suspects to the crime. Gradually, they simply stopped pursuing them. Further attempts to find the killer were unsuccessful. All case materials were collected and remained in the archives of law enforcement for many years. 14-year-old Susan Bombardier was buried at the cemetery in Lafayette. Her death was a real blow to all relatives. They could hardly survive this tragedy, and the girl's mother, hearing that the body of her daughter had been found, simply fainted. Just an hour after she received the tragic news, Susan's diploma was handed to the family. It contained only the highest marks. The local community was shocked by what had happened and very frightened. Everyone was especially dissatisfied with the inability of the police to find the killer. For a long time, the station received calls from concerned people who hoped the criminal would be caught. There were also statements about specific key people, but all turned out to be false leads. Later, attempts were repeatedly made to study the DNA profile of the criminal collected from the victim's body and compared it to the victim. This did not bring success. By the 2000s, the name of Susan Bombardier was remembered only by the old residents of the city and her family, who still hoped and believed in the triumph of justice. When Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons, a journalist of the local newspaper, heard this frightening story, she was shocked that the killer, capable of committing something like that, was never caught and could still be at large. In 2014, the reporter found the girl's grave, after which she began to keep a blog about the unsolved crime. She communicated a lot with her family, local residents, and detectives who worked on the case. Regular publications of Susan's story made it possible to attract the attention of the public and law enforcement officers to the case again. People again began to ask questions. What could have happened to Susan, and why the criminal was still not punished? The police had not been inactive before this point, but now there was strong motivation to solve the case. Several officers turned to the sheriff with a request to give them the opportunity and resources to work on the unsolved murder of the girl. In 2015, DNA samples from Susan Bombardier's case were taken from the archive immediately after a task force for the investigation of unsolved crimes was formed. It included several police enthusiasts who faced very difficult work. This case became the oldest unsolved violent crime in Antioch. The period was not chosen by chance. Shortly before the initiation of the renewed investigation, new forensic technologies appeared that allowed work even with low-quality samples, old materials, or with a very small amount of information sources. Evidence almost 40 years old was sent to the forensic laboratory of the San Mateo County office. This made it possible for the first time to create a complete DNA profile of the criminal. Before this, similar attempts were made, but the technologies did not allow success. Now the situation was different. Having received the full profile of the killer at the beginning of 2017, they decided to check it through the database of registered criminals. Unexpectedly, preliminary identification pointed to Mitchell Bacum. This became a real breakthrough in the case. Detectives did not even believe in success, so additional tests were carried out. The profile was checked through the FBI DNA database. After that, the samples were finally linked to this man. He turned out to be the very suspicious boyfriend of Stephanie, with whom she broke up shortly before Susan's murder. Naturally, this person was in the database not by chance. The police easily clarified his extensive criminal history. Mitchell Lynn Bacum was born on March 21st, 1954, in one of the small towns of Nice in California. In high school, he moved and ended up in the same city of Antioch as Stephanie and Susan. He was indeed a suspect for a long time in the murder of the teenager, but there was no evidence against him until 2017. As it turned out, back in 1973, he was convicted of several crimes at once. After the trial for assault, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. According to the charges, he could have received a life sentence. But before that, the man was not registered as a criminal, so the court was lenient. Having served this short term, he was again free, but already in 1981 he was again convicted of several criminal episodes and found guilty. Now the seasoned criminal received 24 years of imprisonment. All his crimes were connected with rapes. After release, the man was obliged to register as a sex offender. However, he did not do this. So in 2002, he was sentenced to another 4 years of imprisonment for violating the conditions of release. After that, he appeared in the databases. In 2017, when the police came for 63-year-old Mitchell Buckham, he lived in the same city. He was taken into custody without resistance when the killer calmly returned from the store. He denied his connection to the oldest unsolved murder in Antioch. But now the evidence against him was undeniable. After establishing the link of Mitchell to Susan's murder, detectives spoke at a press conference and stated that now his DNA sample was planned to be compared with a number of other unsolved cases. At the time of his arrest, the man was 63 years old. He remained unpunished for 37 years. Considering that his pattern resembled a serial killer, it was believed that during his time free, the man could have killed many people. Finally, the victim's family had hoped that justice would be achieved. The main problem, because of which Mitchell could not be held accountable in 1980, was an alibi. He stated that he spent time with his aunt in a bar in another city, quite far from the place where Susan was babysitting. According to him, he left the bar only about 2 o'clock at night and stopped near the intersection at the entrance to the city. There he went into a night store. The seller recognized him, and then Mitchell went home, as he himself told. Because of these movements, he had a very small time window. Detectives of that time considered him an unlikely killer, including thanks to the confirmation of his words by his aunt and the store clerk. To connect the criminal with the murder then was not possible, although he looked the most suspicious of all. Stephanie herself believed that Mitchell could have been involved in the abduction and murder of her cousin, since he knew the whole family, including the teenager. They saw each other several times during their brief communication. Unfortunately, this was enough for the girl to begin to trust him. That is why Susan opened the door to him and thus sentenced herself to a cold-blooded murder. Stephanie went on only 3 dates with the man, after which she decided that she did not want to continue a romantic relationship. According to her, after the breakup, Mitchell several times came to the restaurant where she worked, did not order anything, but simply sat at the table and silently watched her. This looked frightening, so she decided to completely cut off any communication with the man. Nevertheless, he did not leave her alone. Instead, Mitchell left several notes on her doorstep, came to her work, tried to establish contact. Stephanie was furious when she found out that one of the colleagues gave the guy her home address. Later, the woman justified herself by saying she did not know about their breakup. But now it was obvious that precisely because of this, Susan was exposed to danger and became a victim of abduction, rape, and murder. In 1980, during the investigation, Mitchell was even offered to undergo a polygraph test. He agreed, but the results were considered inconclusive. Detectives conducted many interrogations, but the suspect did not give in. Because of the lack of undeniable evidence, it was not possible to connect him with the murder. Finally, 37 years later, the criminal was arrested. He was charged with a long list of crimes: murder, abduction, and assault. According to the forensic examiner's conclusion, it was unclear whether the assault happened before the killing or afterward. The prosecutor continued to debate whether to demand life imprisonment without parole or to push for the death penalty. Mitchell himself still did not admit guilt in the murder, It was decided to settle for life imprisonment, since a death sentence could lead to endless appeals. Traditionally, in such cases, lawyers begin to file appeal after appeal. Each time, the victims' families would have to relive these painful events, while the dangerous criminal would spend his life on death row, possibly never receiving the execution due to old age. After this, a reconstruction of events began. According to the prosecution, Mitchell could not simply take the girl away without force, since Susan Bombardier would never have left her young nieces unattended. It was believed that he threatened her with a knife and forced her to follow him. Her family was convinced that Susan sacrificed herself because she feared for the younger girls. According to the prosecution, Susan's murder was committed with a knife with a blade at least 15 centimeters long. This was enough to reach her heart with a single blow, causing almost instant death. Presumably, he used the same weapon to threaten her into leaving and later got rid of it along with her body. After the abduction, Mitchell took Susan to an unknown place, assaulted her, and then delivered one powerful strike, nearly piercing her body through. The prosecution believed that only afterward did he commit a second assault. The defense chose a peculiar strategy, taking into account the laws of the state, where punishment for desecrating a body is much lighter. The lawyer insisted that the assault happened after death. He also claimed Mitchell had nothing to do with the abduction and killing, but had simply found the body and taken advantage of it. This strategy was made easier because law enforcement had no direct evidence of the abduction. At Stephanie's house, there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry, giving the defense room to maneuver. However, the prosecution had strong arguments too. The criminal's history showed a recognizable pattern in multiple earlier cases. In 1973, he was detained in Mountain View under suspicion of assaulting another underage girl after breaking into a house for burglary. During the investigation, it turned out he was guilty in another case as well, and he was charged with assault, burglary, and attempted murder. After being released, he again tried to break into someone's home in another city. This time, too, he carried out an attack on a schoolgirl he found inside. During the assault, he tied up his victim, burned her with a cigarette, and stabbed her. The girl miraculously survived. She described his behavior as extremely disturbing. He hummed a song to himself, laughed, and acted like a sadistic predator. Clearly, he derived satisfaction from what he was doing. It took the victim a long time to recover physically. The prosecution believed that all these facts and similarities between cases were enough to convince the jury of Mitchell's guilt in Susan's kidnapping and murder. The entire series of attacks matched the pattern of the criminal responsible for Susan Bombardier's death. The trial was scheduled for March 2022. After his arrest, a press conference was held. Investigators emphasized the dedication of detectives who, 2 years before the arrest, had volunteered to work on the oldest crime in Antioch. The media was also thanked for publishing stories in 2015, 2016 about Susan, which helped keep her tragic case from being forgotten. Police stressed that much still remained to be done, especially since there was concern about the suspect's possible involvement in other crimes committed across the U.S. The press conference ended with an appeal to people who might know of Mitchell Bacon's involvement in other assaults or killings. They were urged to contact Antioch police and give testimony. Officers emphasized that the dangerous man was now behind bars and no longer posed a threat, so witnesses who had previously been afraid could now speak out, but no one responded to this request. After the trial concluded on March 15, 2022, the jury unanimously agreed that police had found the right man. After a short deliberation, they declared Mitchell guilty of first-degree murder and the entire list of other charges, including burglary, abduction, and assault. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole on June 27, 2022. At the sentencing hearing, however, one of the most disturbing details emerged. According to unverified information, one of his former cellmates told prison guards about a confession he heard. Mitchell allegedly admitted that when he once worked as a truck driver traveling across the country, he systematically attacked and killed sex workers in different states. The search for evidence to confirm these claims is still ongoing. The defendant himself called the cellmate story a lie and continues to deny all such accusations. If you like my work, please subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Don't forget to follow my Telegram channel, where I share interesting crime news. Thank you all for watching.